if you know anything you want to ask or raise.
Well, I was late because I had just started reading that one.
Okay, I'll try not to give too much away. Well, I'm glad you couldn't put it down. That's good.
Yeah, the cat was next to me. Reading the book.
Oh.
And I said, oh, I've got time. I missed the one, and I said, oh, I got 4 pages to the end of the chapter.
That way too, yeah. Just curious, where'd you leave off? What was happening when you left off?
Let's see. They were having a party, and they were trying. I'm probably only in like the 3rd chapter, or at the very beginning. And she was trying to get Blair to come to this party, and Larry was having, you know. So the tension is building.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. It's gonna get really interesting.
In the car.
And funny too. Funny too. Okay, well, as Tony said, I'm Sharon Healy-Yang. I'm a mystery writer. I didn't publish my first novel, which is Bait and Switch, until 2015. And although I've been writing since I was 8 years old, I remember the first thing I wrote, it was a short story that never got finished. And it was something about a girl walking down the street being followed by a vampire. You know, and she gets on the bus, and then the vampire gets on the bus, and then I ran out of ideas. And I said to myself afterwards, why would the vampire ride the bus? I mean, could you just turn into a bat? But, you know, that's the way it goes when you're writing. You stop and start a lot. That's why I ended up as a writer becoming an outliner. I know some people are what they call pantsers. You write by the seat of your pants. But when I used to do that, when I was a teenager, and in college, I would just run out of ideas. And so many stories would peter out and never got finished. And what I wrote at that time was, you know, like a lot of writers, I did what people sort of advise you is look at stuff you like to write and try to write that type of thing. And it's just a good training. And eventually, you know, the idea is also, you don't just copy other people's writing. You find what's comfortable for you, and you know, maybe keep what you had as a basis, and then you find your own voice. So for a long time, sort of life got in the way. Bait and Switch, the very first draft I finished in 1980 when I was, it was a great life. I was working on my master's degree during the day, working at Caldor for 4 or 5 hours every night, and then from like 10 to 1 working on a novel. And you know, since I could get up late because I was working, you know, my full-time job, not my full-time, part-time job was at night. But finally I finished it, and you know, I thought I had something pretty good. People around me who liked it, read it, liked it. But it wasn't ready. It wasn't ready for publication, and there were a few reasons. Part was that I was just not polished enough yet. Another reason was it was set in the 1940s, and I'll get into why I really like writing about that era. I was writing about the 1940s in 1980, so it wasn't historical enough yet. So if you wanted to read a novel that had mystery and romance, people were looking at either present day or maybe turn of the century. So I just kept trying to get it published and getting good responses. And then eventually the tide turned and it was historical. It was 50 years later. So that could work. And, you know, getting the responses was useful even when I didn't get published, because I got reaffirmed on the things that would help me and make it good. I had to sort of answer questions about where there were problems with it. And it, again, just made me a better writer. And I just kept building on that as I kept writing. In fact, even after I finished the first novel, Bait and Switch, and was trying to get it published, I immediately, well, not immediately, but some years later, moved on to write the second novel, Letter from a Dead Man. So it wasn't as if I wrote something, got it published, and then moved on to something else. It was, I was constantly in motion, constantly revising and constantly writing. And in fact, I even have written 2 other novels that I haven't published yet, but eventually I want to send them out during this time. And then when I wrote always play the dark horse again. I was in the process of getting Letter from a Dead Man published. Now, I was a college professor at Worcester State University. So that meant from September to May, I had no life but teaching and maybe doing some scholarship. So all my writing took place during the summer, and I would throw myself, full bore into it. So it must have taken me 3 or 4 summers to, maybe 2 summers to complete the first draft. And as anyone who writes knows, you keep doing drafts and doing drafts. But finally, this came out this year. It was probably would have come out last year if COVID hadn't slowed things down. And, I just love writing. And what do I like to write? Well, as I said, I love mysteries. And I'm really interested in the 40s. I'm not quite sure why. I like the films of the time period. I like the writings. I read a lot of mysteries not just set in the 40s, but were actually written in that time period. I have really wonderful memories of watching movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s, mostly the 40s, with my parents sometimes, and especially if it was a mystery, like 3 seconds in, my mother would say, "He did it," and she was always right. It would take me like 6 seconds, but and my father was so annoyed, he'd say, "Oh, don't say that," but she was always right, what can I say? Or as my dad used to say about my mother, even when she's wrong, she's right. So I love that, or sometimes I'd just be up late by myself watching movies. And I love the ambiance, the use of black and white, the use of shadow, the suggestiveness of it, the clever, snappy dialogue. And I really liked what I come to call the smart talking gals, which, you have people like Joan Bennett and Susan Hayward and Ella Raines and Rosalind Russell, who always had a quick answer. They were like my mother and knew the answer to the crime, 3 seconds in. They wouldn't take guff from anybody. They were not innocent little children, but they were not femme fatales either. And they dressed great. I love those hats and spectator pumps and tailored suits. And you can see I sort of adopted the style. This is actually a vintage dress, so it's the hat. Mm-hmm. I just adored that. And I liked the challenge, and I liked the mental engagement these movies created in me, and imaginative engagement. So I said to myself, there aren't enough movies. I think I'll write some. So I decided that when I wrote, it would be like writing a movie. I'm extremely visual. A lot of people who've read what I've written have said to me, yeah, it's like watching a movie, but through descriptions. I love the use of, again, shadow, suggestion, sort of a romantic, but also a dark view of the world. And in my books, there's very much a sense of kind of the film noir. There's maybe a little bit more lightness in it. I think there's somewhat more humor. Although even, you watch a lot of the film noir, there's a lot of snappy dialogue and, the detective, whether it's Dick Powell or Humphrey Bogart or whoever, has always got a snappy, incisive comment. Insouciant, I think that's the word. So that's how I got started writing these books. And they're very much influenced by films I've seen. So Bait and Switch, I really wanted to do a tongue-in-cheek kind of mystery. But again, I wanted to keep you guessing, and I wanted to bring in sort of the dark shadows of a noir world. So I was influenced by a lot of movies like All Through the Night. I don't know if you guys know that. Humphrey Bogart, William Demarais, Peter Lorre. Once Upon a Honeymoon, Cary Grant and Ginger Rogers. The Fallen Sparrow. So there was usually humor in them, but I was really interested with how these films dealt with Nazi infiltrators and fifth columnists. So I thought it would be really fun to play on that. So this book, I like to bring in the sort of noir atmosphere, and I'll just read you a little passage how I tried to capture it, but I also tried to get the humor. But I'll start with the noir atmosphere. Dim, cold, dark. Jessica Minton wished she could feel that good about the play she was rehearsing. Cars splashed past, as if anyone in this city would ever slow down, even in this lousy weather. No lights illuminated the theater marquee behind her, and even the Desiree Cafe down the street had replaced its neon sign. It was late summer 1943, and most of New York City, lively city lights had been darkened because of Nazi U-boats patrolling the coast and sinking ships. A thought that made Jess shiver even more than this chill storm. Across the street beckoned the warmth and life visible through the plate glass window of Schaffner's drugstore. There hadn't been any warmth in the theater tonight, only a ragged rehearsal and a volatile director firing an even more temperamental young actor. Well, dwelling on how she'd been sucked into that emotional maelstrom wasn't doing her any good. Better to get across the street and restore herself with some of Harry Schaffner's good Java and whatever pastry had been drum up at this hour. Getting across the street didn't do anything to improve Jessica's mood, for her adept leap onto the opposite curb carried her over the gutter and into a puddle. Shaking a soggy black sandal foot, Jessica could almost admit that her beau Larry might be onto something when he pressed her to marry him and leave acting. After 6 years in the theater, she might be eating regularly, but she still wasn't exactly burning up the Great White Way. Life must indeed be going downhill. The only haven in sight was a stool at Schaffner's lunch counter. So I tried to get, the sort of the darkness, I don't want to say dreariness exactly, but it's not a stable, it's not a secure place. But I also tried to give a little tongue-in-cheek humor about, when you do it, you jump to safety in a puddle. So and much of that is what's going to go on in the novel, because while she's there, she happens to be sitting next to, eventually she realizes she's sitting next to this guy who's smoking and seems very nervous. So I'll just read a little bit from that. And you'll see some of the humor, but also how I'm also trying to play in some of the, actually I think I'll use some of the suspense. Okay. Harry is a guy, she's had a little repartee with Harry, the guy who runs the counter. True, sort of like the George Tobias or one of these, character actors you see who knows more. So she knew better than to argue with Harry, at least just now. So back to the coffee. Ugh, no sugar? Swell, the sugar canister next to her was empty. Even if there was a war on, did she have to be shortchanged on sugar tonight? Maybe the guy 2 seats down would pass her his sugar canister before her craving for sweet sent her off to mug a GI for his Hershey bar. Jess turned, started to speak, but hesitated. When she'd come in, she'd barely noticed the man behind his newspaper. However, her curiosity was now definitely piqued by his tense behavior. Intermittently smoking, staring past her out the window, tensely glancing down one of the aisles off to his right, then stubbing out a cigarette and lighting another. Finally realizing he was being observed, he stared her down and demanded in a British accented voice, which I can't do, so just use your imagination. Haven't you ever seen anyone smoke before? I've seen people smoke, Jess replied, settling her elbow comfortably on the counter. He interrupted his nervous vigil to snuff out yet another cigarette and inquire sarcastically, I imagine you've seen people extinguish cigarettes also. Well, yes, but never in their food. He blinked, then stared into his plate, only now realizing that his mashed potatoes were gouged with cigarette butts. That's your third, Jessica pointed out. She couldn't help noticing that the lean-faced gentleman was easy on the eyes, in a bohemian kind of way. Tousled, longish dark hair and a mustache fuller than Ronald Coleman razors. Not that she was in the market with an equally dark and handsome Larry Sanders in the picture. Her companion opened his mouth for a retort, but froze. As he caught sight of something outside, his expression erased Jessica's impishness. She straightened, then instinctively followed his gaze out the window. A car splashed by. Rain blurred the street lamp's illumination beyond the window. Jessica was slightly surprised to find herself relieved at not discovering anything fishy out there. But that relief evaporated as she sensed her companion was doing something to her coat on the chair between them. Turning back sharply, indignantly, Jess started, say, just what? Her companion cut her off by leaning forward and tensely, quietly instructing. There's no time for questions. Just do as I say. I've hidden a brown paper wrap package under your coat. After I'm gone, take it home with you. Try not to let anyone see you have it when you leave. If anyone does, convince them you came in with it. You're a clever girl. You can come up with a cover story. Jessica snapped. How did you know I was clever? Anyway, I most certainly will do no such thing. Are you so truly concerned about not doing enough for your country? Were those just empty words I heard coming from you a few moments ago, Miss Minton demanded. Of course how do you know my name? Right here in front of me, I have the same section of the paper that you and your friend, the proprietor, were just talking about. And I'm not unfamiliar with your career. Now stop wasting time with questions and follow my instructions. Then you'll be doing the equivalent of thwarting a panzer division. He was on his feet, taking a cautious step past her, scouting through the window, trying not to be visible to anyone outside. And he seemed especially careful not to draw Harry's notice. He was completely wrapped up in giving what for to the gaggle of delinquent bobby soxers. I don't understand, Jess protested. Crazy as it all seemed, at this moment she was drawn into the stranger's determination to remain undetected. But by whom? Facing Jess again, he silenced her with his answer. You don't have to understand. God forgive me for dragging you into this, but here we are. Just take the package and sit tight until it's safe for me to retrieve it. I'll keep an eye on you, low profile, of course, but for your sake, my sake, our country's sake, don't let anyone know what's passed between us. It's in your hands until it's safe for me to get it out of town. It? What it? Just keep a low profile. Far from convinced, Jessica challenged the unnerving stranger. Do you really expect me to buy this bill of goods? No soap, mister. If this were the real McCoy, why wouldn't you go for the police or the FBI? Haven't you heard of fivers, fifth columnists, traitors infiltrating the authorities? I'm on the run now because a German mole in this town liquidated my contact. I can't trust any of the regular authorities here. I need to leave this package with someone whom no one will suspect, but is easy for me to track down until I can find a way to get safely out of the city. So if the city is so chock full of Nazis, what makes you think I'm such a good bet? Why trust me? His features tensed with frustration. Fear even? The man's quick glance out the window, followed by his sharp reply, suggested that only his desperation to convince Jessica kept him talking rather than beating feet. Because my back's to the wall right now, and long shot that you are, you appear to be the only chance I have. I've got a pretty good idea of your patriotism for your conversation with the proprietor. So I'm placing all my bets on you, on your being right enough to help me. Don't let me down. But someone is coming, and he doesn't look like my contact. Don't forget everything I told you. I'll be in touch. Wait, where are you going? But this tall, wiry figure had moved rapidly into the maze of aisles leading to the rear of the store. Of course, out the back way. Wasn't that always the exit strategy for a mysterious man followed by Nazi agents? And that's all I'm going to read you now. So I wanted to have, some of that sharp repartee that you get between leading characters. I also wanted to kind of play on the melodrama and have a little fun with it. I want to evoke that kind of sense of excitement and mystery and, as I said, some melodrama that you saw in a lot of the movies at the time. But again, have some fun with it, not be just over-the-top melodramatic. And I wanted to bring out that Jessica is a sharp-talking gal. She's no fool. She wants to know what's going on. And with the rest of the story, it's, is he really a British agent? Or is he some kind of a double agent? And is he trying to get to someone else that's connected to her? Or is that person connected to her actually the fiver he's concerned about? So between Jessica and her smart talking sister and her wise aleck cat, they have to get to the truth of what's going on. And that's something I really enjoyed in my writing, the relationship between the sisters. I don't have a sister, but I have a sister-in-law. And we often banter back and forth, and we tease each other and give each other a hard time. And she thinks, well, as we've gotten older with Mello, but early on especially, she thought I didn't know anything, and I thought she interfere too much. So I kind of brought that in a little bit with the sisters, but it's clear they really like each other and they'll defend each other. So the second book, Letter from a Dead Man, was one where it focused more on Jessica and Liz, her sister Liz. And Liz gets in trouble. What was your name? I want to say Pat. Pat mentioned, you know, the sister Liz has a business and she has a partner in the business who has kind of a shady background. Yeah. And Jessica is really concerned about that. The person that Liz is involved with is concerned about that, but also jealous. And so it turns out, I'm not going to give you too much.
That's all right, because I'm going to read it and I'm get my own imagination.
Oh, yeah. Let's just say there's a murder and someone very close to Jessica and Liz gets framed for it. And it turns out there's this kind of big league blonde, and I'm quoting from, what's that wonderful movie? Murder My Sweet, which is what Anne Shirley calls Claire Trevor's character, who is well married now, but she has, if you dig deep enough, you find that she also has a shady background. And she doesn't like the partner, and he doesn't like her either. So she ends up trying to frame someone close to the ladies for the murder. And also the sisters have two friends, Iris and Lois. And the four of them, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a chick novel, but maybe it would be a Dane novel if it's the 40s. But the four of them, it's more about friendship than it is about romance, although there is some romance in there. The four of them have to work together to solve the mystery. And I have some truly Lucy and Ethel moments with Liz and Jessica. In one place they have to hide, so they have to sneak down like this or in a basement apartment so they can't be seen, and jump into a closet and hold the closet door closed. And then they listen in on some crook's plans, and they have to be careful not to get caught. And then another point, Jessica has to put on a disguise and go into another crook's apartment. She's disguised as a maid and find a stolen gun that could implicate somebody. So there's a lot of fun in this, and it's more, no Nazis though, but it is more of a straight sort of noir. And I was very influenced by some of the characters and scenes by Murder My Sweet. And there's a detective in here who is sort of helping the sisters, but he's very skeptical as well, Leo McLaughlin. And as I sort of intimated, but I can explain more, I tend to cast my novels. So you have Claire Trevor kind of as the, you know, femme fatale in this. And I was thinking of a young Brian Aherne as Evan Blair. And obviously I was thinking of Rosalind Russell as the sister. And the detective I was thinking of as Fred McMurray, but not the My Three Sons lovable goofy dad, but like Walter Neff or in, I can't think of the character, Calloway Went That Away, you know, kind of cynical, hard-bitten, been around, you know, so, because he does really, he's really good at playing that kind of a role. So again, I tried to have a lot of fun with, you know, the motif, but I also have some suspense in here. And if you're looking at the cover, yes, this is one of the lions at the New York Public Library, because there's one part where Jessica has to hide. And every time my husband and I would walk by the library, I would say, I gotta use this in a story. These lions are so cool. Gotta use this in a story. So I finally figured out how to do it. And I will give you a very brief reading of how I used it. Okay. So Jess is on the subway with a friend, and it's late at night, and she gets on, and then she recognizes as soon as she gets on that there are a couple of the, if I may use the gangster slang of the 40s, torpedoes who worked for Mrs. Tewksbury, who's that blonde, and she realizes I can get out of here. Gotta get off this subway train. The door slammed shut behind her, so she's jumped off. The train hadn't started yet, so you don't have to worry about her getting wet. But there was no time to waste checking if anyone was in pursuit. Jessica hit the stairs. As Jessica hit the stairs, she could hear racing footsteps on the platform. Then there was some kind of crash. Please, God, let that buy me some time. The top of the stairs loomed above. Had Alana's boys been smart enough to pull someone up there to catch her? No time to hesitate. She'd just have to hold tight to her giant shoulder bag and come out swinging. Outside, the fresh evening air hit her at the same time she realized that no hoods lurked to grab her. But neither was there anyone to help her. Breathing raggedly, Jessica hurtled down 42nd Street, recognizing too late that she was actually moving away from her best source of help, Times Square. No time to double back, past the underground entrance that might even now be disgorging her pursuers. A glance back, a movement in darkness, in the shrubs of Bryant Park. She couldn't keep this pace up forever. The public library loomed monstrously on her right. Yes, the library. Putting on one more burst of speed, Jessica veered to her right onto Fifth Avenue. Her eyes fastened on the nearest of the library's famous recumbent lion statues, its base cloaked in shadows. Another glance behind before the corner separated her from her pursuer's vision, and vice versa. Too hasty, nothing clear, and no cabs in sight to try to hop into. Jess scrambled up the lowest, broadest portion of the stone steps leading into the library, then sank into the darkness at the statue's base. A few quick, deep breaths were all she could afford before she had to focus on making herself undetectable to the eye and ear. All that mattered was melting into the shadows. Thank God she was wearing black, except for a white lace collar. Swiftly, her hand covered it. Footsteps came charging up and around the corner. Jessica couldn't even gulp. She could only make the deity 1,000 promises for spiritual reform to get her out of this jam. And there was one message from the heart sent out to the person she loved most. So you have to read the book to find out who it was, did they catch her, why is she running away? But that was really a lot of fun to write, and there's actually a funny story about that scene. I wanted to figure out, and I think a lot of writers may do this, I wanted to try out, could you actually jump off the subway, run up the steps at that subway stop, up the street, and hide behind the lion? So my husband and I went into New York. We would go in anyway for fun. We went down, I got on the subway, the bell clanged, I jumped off, I ran across the platform, up the steps, down the street, around that corner, and so it worked. Of course, I did it in sneakers and not spectator pumps. But, and you said you were chasing me,
Yeah.
followed me, and nobody said a word. So, I did try it out. There are certain things I do try out, because especially when you're writing mystery, or I would say maybe fantasy or horror too, you have to make everything else as believable as possible, because you're asking people, to believe in some incredible things about, packages left by fifth columnists or murders or people getting involved in doing these crazy things. So everything else has to really make sense. And that can kind of cover, as long as you're not too absurd, that really helps. You probably found that, Kate, when you were writing your ghost story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you really have to make everything else make sense. Yeah. So that, about is what I have to say on this one. As I said, it's more noir than the other one. The other is a bit noir, but it's also kind of like 1940s espionage thriller, gosh, the Nazis are here. All right, my next one, my final one. Well, that's my final one because I actually have a fourth one written, but that's on the back burner until, I get, everybody's tired of this one. And I have ideas for about 2 or 3 more in the series. So I have lots of ideas. I'm probably going to die before I finish them.
But are they all with Jessica?
I have 3 more in mind with Jessica, and then I have a few more in mind with other characters. Yeah. In fact, I'm thinking of doing one with her sister, where her and I don't want to say too much because it might give away things like that. But yeah, Somebody said to me, I don't know if Liz could carry a whole story, but I don't know. We'll see.
She's kind of smart assy.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of it goes a long way, too much.
Yeah.
Well, this book also is influenced by movies I've seen. And one of the reasons that the movies that I especially was thinking of were Jean Renoir's The Woman on the Beach, because it's very dreamy, it's very romantic, it's very symbolic. To me, it's like listening to Debussy. It has the same effect on me. And I wanted to write a story that had that sort of eerie, haunting, romantic with a capital R, like, you know, Keats and Shelley, that kind of thing. But there's also some romance in here too, because we have Jessica's married in this one. I can talk a little bit about that later. So I set it's set on Connecticut, Long Island Sound, at a fictional women's college, 1946. Again, settings that I actually have experienced came into play. I don't know if you guys know Avery Point, the Avery Point campus of, isn't it beautiful? Well, that's the women's college. That becomes Margaret's Point College. And so you know the Windsor House, that kind of chateau they have there? It's right overlooking yeah. So I always said this would be a great place for a university. And instead of putting all the administration in there, we're going to put the English department. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So in fact, I really want to do a blog on that. We took a lot of pictures actually indoors, but I can't find the pictures. Eventually, I'm going to do a blog on it, how it influenced. But again, I thought this is a great place for a mystery. And I also just was in the mood to write something about summer. So it takes place in July and August. And I love what my husband did with the cover, because I said, I want you to capture that sort of dreamy time on a summer evening, just before twilight. So I thought he did a great job with the colors. And I think he really captured it. And then he did a good job. You could see the shadow of the horse and the way he did the ocean. You can see the setting sun on it. He did a beautiful, beautiful job. And I'll tell you something funny about this picture of Jessica. As I think I mentioned, I was sort of inspired from my main actress was Joan Bennett, because I think she does a good job of playing smart, intelligent, strong characters, witty characters. So we kind of adapted a picture of her. Don't tell anybody. I don't think it's a problem. But on Facebook, I'm in a Joan Bennett tribute Facebook group. One of her grandchildren is on there, and he said, "Oh yeah, that looks just like Donnie," which is what the grandkids used to call her. So I guess I got the approval of one of Joan's grandchildren. So. So again, this story, they end up going to this place. James, I'm going to step away. Her husband has a job there teaching, and before they come here, in my prologue, somebody is murdered. And everyone thinks this person has disappeared, but we have seen in the prologue that this person is murdered. And when they're there, they find her body washed on the beach. And there was something about, she was involved with another professor on campus, whose wife is a real tartar. And this other guy actually had been Jessica's old boyfriend when they were in college. And let me see, oh, there is literally a dark horse. There's this guy who was, he had a boat shot out from under him, a ship, I'm sorry, because he was in the Coast Guard, shot out from under him, and he had been, what's the word I want, invalided out. He likes to keep to himself, and he has this beautiful black horse, and he likes to ride the beach. And some people are kind of scared of him because he's not very friendly. Jessica, who loves horses, you'll see, I think she rides a horse in at least one of every book. And it's an in-joke that she loves horse racing, and she knows a lot about horse racing. She befriends him about this horse. So there literally is a dark horse here. There is. But there are questions about him that come up that are very dangerous and might link him to the murder. And through all of this, Jessica's husband has a secret that doesn't come out until halfway through. So I'm going to read you a little section from it, and I think part of this kind of captures the haunting, but also the humor. And what has happened is, it's late at night, and Jessica has fallen asleep. Her husband is in town on something, and she's awakened because she hears the horse, and they have sliders on this cottage they live in by the beach, and the horse is standing on the patio and he's neighing at her. And his saddle is askew, and she knows, well, something, if this is the guy who owned him, something must have happened to him. So she tries to call, nobody's there. She thinks, what am I going to do? I don't want to think this guy could be on the beach injured. So, because this is all, you know, the cottage is near the beach. This guy lives near, further down. So she fixes a saddle that's on the horse and goes to look for him. So she rides all the way back to his house along the beach. And then she comes up a rise. The barn didn't come into sight until Jessica crested the rise aboard Blackie, which is the horse's name. There it was, directly ahead, a small affair, only big enough for 1 or 2 stalls and storage of tack and feed. It stood a ways back, its door snugly closed. Jessica pulled up Blackie to take in the whole compound. The barn directly ahead with a little paddock and feed and water troughs, a small cottage, almost a shack, to her right, much closer. Only 1 floor, a wood shingle roof and weathered clapboards. The roof extended over a wood planked porch at the front. Light shone through the window, looking onto the porch and through the open front door. Open. Jessica scanned the flat area around her. Nothing, no one. No sounds but the tide, not even insects. Still as a graveyard in the moonlight. Lousy metaphor that. She started to call Phil's name, but stopped. If he was silent because he was unconscious, what was the use? That's the reason she kept her trap shut, she told herself. Jessica's eyes returned to the door opening into the cottage. A quick glance at the barn again, back to the cottage. No, if she were injured, she'd aim for the house to collapse in. Besides, the barn was shut up. Okay, son, Jess said more quietly than she'd expected. Let's check things out. She urged Blackie over to the house at a walk. Her hesitation was only minuscule before she slipped out of the saddle and bobbled, thinking, it's a longer way down than I thought. Jess tied Blackie's reins to one of the porch supports, then instructed him, don't you go anywhere. Blackie nuzzled her in moral support before Jess turned and strode into the doorway. Leaning on the doorframe, she surveyed the one-room digs Phil Novak called home, hoping to find him within. No one. An overhead light shielded by a tin cone illuminated the room harshly. To Jessica's right, below the wide window, light also shone from a lamp on a wooden desk that had seen better days. A candlestick phone sat on a desk too. On the far wall of the cabin, an open door revealed part of a claw-footed tub. At least Phil had indoor plumbing. The floors of the cabin had once been snugly planked, but weathering had warped them. Rugs were scattered about to keep out drafts. Phil hadn't been so lucky with the sand trapped or blown in. Yep, every light on the place was on, but no one was home. Something was really off here. Jess cast a glance back at Blackie, who seemed at ease. That reassured her a little. So what now, with no Phil Novak in sight and his house looking like something left behind by the lost colonists of Roanoke Island? She hadn't found an injured Phil between here and her place, so he probably wasn't hurt, at least by being thrown. With no sign of a struggle in here, Jessica didn't think he'd been carried off by that cruise she feared. Maybe he'd left a note behind somewhere. Jess stepped into the room, automatically closing the door behind her and calling, Phil, Mr. Novak, are you here? Are you hurt? Nothing. Funny, somehow calling out made her feel less of an intruder. Jessica found herself next to the desk, strewn with papers and opened envelopes. Her hand went forward, but she stopped. Snooping into a guy's mail was intrusive, but definitely wasn't it also a federal offense? Anyway, she'd probably just mess up clues that I won't tell you who the husband is, would need to look into. She'd certainly revealed that someone had been poking around Novak's stuff. Yet wasn't this a prime opportunity to look for that special package Phil was holding for Soderstruck? A package you wouldn't recognize if you fell over it. Maybe Phil was even now handing his secret what's-it over to that Nazi rat, leaving his door open, his lights blazing, and his horse running wild while he did it. None of this added up. Maybe she should stop looking for deep, dark secrets and concentrate on the most down-to-earth explanation. Phil had gone off in search of Blackie after the horse had somehow gotten away. As much as she thought she knew went on between Phil and the horse, she could have been dead wrong. Blackie could have been spooked by a passing car on that lonely road and taken off. Maybe the smart move would be to leave Phil a note that she had his horse. Her decision made, Jess grabbed the pen off the desk, scanning for a piece of blank paper. Nothing. She'd have to write on the back of one of these envelopes, which gave her the perfect excuse to check and see. They were just a bunch of bills and something from the VA. Darn. Well, wouldn't you know it, this pen wouldn't write. Damp sea air. Perfect excuse to open one of the drawers and look for another, but Jessica didn't. Someone knowing she'd only left a note here was one thing, but evidence of her poking through the desk suggested she'd been sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Jess scowled, glancing up at the wall above the desk for the first time, noticing the pictures tacked there. A few of shipmates, filled with a guy resembling him holding the head of a horse in the winter circle at Rockingham Park. The horse wasn't Blackie, though. Phil was a lot younger and a lot happier. The picture had been taken 11 years ago, long before his brother had died, before a world war had shut a ship out from under him, before he'd gotten mixed up with his prize bunch. Phil had caught more than his share of tuck breaks. What was he catching right now? Jessica paced across the room, thinking hard what to do. Too bad one of those pictures hadn't been signed, "Thanks for being a swell henchman, your pal, Georg Soderstruck." She was standing next to the counter now, tapping her fingers. Stay or go. If Phil had been hurt in a riding accident, she'd have found him. Who knew when he'd be back, or if he'd be back alone? Then again, could he be in the barn? Now that made no sense. He'd hardly have shooed off Blackie, then locked himself in there. But someone could have driven off the horse and taken care of Phil in the barn. Blackie was snorting and pawing outside. He even let out a nervous whinny. Phil? No. Blackie wouldn't have sounded so rattled, so defensive. Good grief. Maybe whoever approached was no friend at all. And here I am in a big open room with no back door. Blackie was really antsy now, but at this angle, Jessica couldn't see why through the open window over the desk. Could she duck in the bathroom? No time. The counter, only the counter. Scowling at the hand dealt her, Jess dashed behind the counter, barely pausing to grab the cast iron skillet. A girl never knows when denting a Nazi noggin might become imperative. Crouching behind the counter, she gnawed her lip and prayed that the Gene Krupa drum solo her heart was pounding out couldn't be heard by anyone but herself. What she wouldn't have given to tuck herself neatly into the cabinets under the counter, but no reducing plan could do that trick. What was she going to do? This invader only had to round the counter and she'd be sunk. Why had she sat tight at home and waited? Why did she have to be such a 14-carat do-gooding sap? That was when Jess noticed that Blackie had settled down. Had Georgie boy slipped him a lump of sugar with a Mickey Finn? Shouldn't the unnamed visitor have reached the door by now? What was he waiting for? Something was fishy. Jess gripped her frying pan tighter, almost wishing it were all over. Jessica, you know I can see you right through this window. And that's what I mean. So I would also add, this is set in 1946. So you're saying, but the Nazis were dead and gone. What I found really interesting was from like 45, maybe almost to 48, 49, in the movies, they really had this fear of a resurgence of Nazis. They're constantly The Stranger with Orson Welles, Conflict with Dick Powell. I forget, there were others too. They were concerned with Nazis who had gone under Berlin Express with Merle Oberon and Robert Ryan. There was this really, before they latched onto the fear of communists, and they had that witch hunt, they kept making films, and I can't help thinking this must have reflected the fear that people had that the Nazis weren't completely quashed. So I decided to play on that and was influenced by that in this book. In fact, I even make a kind of some humorous references to Orson Welles' The Stranger in here as well. So that's kind of me. That's, you know, what I do, my background, why I write, what I write, the type of things I write. But do you have any questions about, you know, my writing process or my research, or, you know, how did I get published, how do I promote my work? Do you have any questions for me?
What do you teach? Does it affect your writing at all?
Well, you know, I'm retired now, but my teaching, well, I think I tend to be kind of more descriptive and go into more characters because I taught Victorian lit. So you know, I'm not writing 800-page, you know, George Eliot writes 800 pages, it's worth it. I'm not writing them, although this one is kind of big, but I'm not writing them that long and not quite that descriptive, but I think delving into character and what characters think, and trying to get kind of a verisimilitude in the senses, drawing on the senses, what people see and smell and feel and taste. I think that part influenced me. I also think where I taught the Romantics, and they're very visual, they play a lot on the senses and they're very descriptive, but they still try to, they're not over the top necessarily, they try to get the mot juste. I think that influences me too, and that kind of makes me more of a visual writer as well. So.
I think that was one of the things I noticed.
Yeah.
I had to get used to your writing.
Okay, yeah.
Because to me, it was overly detailed.
Okay.
But once you pick up the rhythm of it,
yes,
it's descriptive.
Yes.
And I had the movie running in my head.
Yes, yes,
exactly.
Yes.
And so, I mean,
it's a different style from a lot of what people are doing in mysteries.
Maybe that's it. I mean,
yeah.
Because I read a variety of books, and I can't say I have a favorite.
Right.
But so whichever book I pick up, I have to get used to the style.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. I think that's true.
You know, once I got into the rhythm of the description,
yes,
then it was black and white in my head.
It was
not color.
That's good. Yeah.
It was black and white.
I think that's sort of like my outfit.
Right. I mean, and you just mentioned Gene Cooper. I actually remember him.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, that's funny because sometimes people say to me, well, actually my husband was just asking me about this too. Do people get the references? And I said, well, it's really interesting because some people get it, either because of their parents or they're old enough, or there is an audience who just loves stuff about the 40s and 50s and 30s. So they're familiar. There are other people who don't get it and look it up. And they say, oh yeah, that's interesting. And there are other people who don't look it up, but they like the rest of the story, so it doesn't bother them. Right. So it's really, it's like there were three groups. It's really interesting.
Layers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the other image that came up when you were reading from the first book.
Yes.
I have Jessica sitting on the stool, this empty stool.
Yeah.
I know exactly what it looks like, the vinyl top, the wide metal band.
Yeah.
And the person on the other side sitting there.
Yeah.
And just lifting the coat and putting, I mean, it is so, I got the movie in my head. I'm so glad that's because when I write it, before I write it down, I actually run a scene like a movie in my head. And then I have to find the language. You were successful in doing it.
Well, thank you. Because it's hard. You know, it really is hard. Yeah, words are so limited.
Yeah.
But also too, a writer is only as good as his or her readers, because I think we have to work together. You know, I give you the points, and then you create it in your head. So I think we have to work together. So I'm glad that's great.
I was thinking of
Yeah.
the first one you're reading too, of like an Edward Hopper painting, not as
Oh.
not as
Yeah.
dark as that, but
Yes.
yeah, but the culture, one lonely person.
Yeah.
You know, that whole, yeah, it really reminded me, again, the visual of like a Hopper painting.
Well, I'm so glad that I managed to capture that ambiance. You know, and I think, yeah, that is sort of the style.
Yeah.
It really, the films I've seen have really infused my brain. And so that, you know, the descriptions go with that. There was something, what else was I going to say? Oh, shoot, don't you hate that? And you have something, you have something.
Edward Hopper?
Yeah,
No.
no, oh, well, it'll come, oh, I know. If you read some of the mysteries, like George Herman Cox, Margaret Millar, Francis Crane, who's some of the other ones I like? David Goodis, Cornell Woolrich, they tend to write like that. When you read them, you really see the images, and it's, a couple of times I would be thinking about something, I'd say, was that a Cornell Woolrich story, or was that a movie by Val Lewis? Sometimes it would turn out to be both, but you know, they're very visual, and I don't know, I think I'm more drawn to them than I was influenced by the writers, because I wasn't able to get a hold of those books until after I really started doing more writing, and I was a little older. But I think it may have also kind of helped me hone my writing skills as well. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming for. Yeah. Anything else I could, I know, I always think to the audience and people have to ask questions. You know, a lot of the research was fun to do. I know you're a researcher. I'll tell you guys some of the things I did. And then if you want to talk about anything too. Part of what helped me was, you know, my parents grew up in that era. They were young people. My dad was born in 1923, my mom in 1913. So they were young people during that time. So I would talk to them. I was lucky. I had really good parents. We could talk. They would tell me all about their experiences. My dad was in World War II and growing up in Lowell in the neighborhoods. My mother worked all kinds of different jobs, factories. She was an inspector during the war. And she really was kind of like the original smart talking gal. I remember, I'll tell you a little story about her that's kind of cute. When she and my dad were dating, they went to a party, and this was Lowell, probably like 1949. So you walked everywhere. Nobody had a car, you walked. So they went to the party, and he was like flirting around with all the other girls, and she thought, well, you know, you dance with who brung you. And so she got up and she left, and he was following after. She said, and he kept trying to, you know, apologize and talk to him. She wouldn't talk to him all the way home. He was trying to talk, she wouldn't talk to him. They get to her door. She finally turns and she said, would you like a cup of coffee? And she said, yeah. And she said, go home and make yourself one. And my students used to love that story. I had a couple of them write it down. But that's the kind of, you know, it was like,
First-hand knowledge.
yes, exactly. Maybe they wrote the characters in the movies like that because a lot of people were like that.
Yeah.
You know, they were, you know, articulate and well-read. Now there's other ways. My mother also had a friend, Marion Blake, who was a nurse, and she actually was a combat nurse. She was in the European theater during the war too. So she would tell us stories, and she would, you know, so I would get a good feel. I'd get an idea of the language, because I do like to incorporate the slang or the terminology of the time period. Nobody says groovy or anything like that. And part of it is because my parents still use said some things. And then also, I just watched old movies, and if I saw a phrase I thought was good, I would write it down.
Yeah.
And then I even watched some old British movies because I had some characters who were English, so I wrote down their phrases too. And then I tried to think of now which characters would use these phrases more. So, Jessica might use, for Pete's sake a lot, or, calls her husband and say, listen, mister, affectionate, but, a little fresh. And then it just was, it was kind of fun doing that. Sometimes people got a little confused. My friend Anita was reading Always Play the Dark Horse. And there's one part where they're kind of the adults are joking around with hipster slang. What would it? Yeah, I guess Hepcat slang. And one of them says, well, I'll read. And my friend Anita said, I think they did a typo here, because I think you want to say all right, but this person says I'll read. And I said, no, that's a slang of the time period. So, but I guess that'd be a case of where somebody has to look it up. Not everyone can call me on the phone and ask. But that was kind of fun. But one other thing I did, which was interesting, was I would go to the library and I go to the microfiche machine, and I would get the New York Times for like a few weeks, and the first one 43, the second one 45, and the third one 46. And then book number 4, which I wrote over the past couple of years, was 47. And I would just read the news stories. And I would also, look at what was in the advertisements. So I would see what things cost. And some of the news stories would be, just really simple things like, after the war, prices were going up, so salmon and sardine sandwiches went out 35 cents. And I thought to myself, salmon and sardine, bleh. And so that becomes a running joke in here too. But in the first book, I found out about these spies, German spies that were dropped off on Amagansett Beach, Long Island during, it was actually 42, so I played a little bit and I had it 43. So you had read the book, that actually happened about them finding those people. So you sometimes come up with plot points that, you might not have thought of. And, looking at the past, something that really happened that can trigger events or affect what's going on in the story. So, yeah. So anything else I can explain or? Huh? Okay, well, thank you very much. If anyone would like to purchase a book, I have them over here and I can sign them. If not, that's okay. But if you're interested, if you have any other questions.